Thank you very much to Liberal Party, Prime Minister, Mr. Hawke, to be here to answer the questions of the community and their concerns and their feedback. And I thank the community when we asked for questions. We were inundated with questions. I have summarized them here and hopefully we'll be able to go through all of them. I'll start with the questions straight away. You've already touched on it, Mr. Morrison, but I'll repeat it anyway. How will your party support Indian community to make sure we have appropriate religious and cultural aged care facilities? We don't have any at present, neither here nor in Melbourne.
Well, thank you for the question. Aged care is one of the most challenging policy issues we're confronting as a country right now. I commissioned the Royal Commission into aged care in this country. And I did that because I was aware that we could do things so much better to ensure the dignity of Australians as they age in this country. Now, that's not to say that in this country people have been receiving good care. Of course they have. My own father and many others have benefited, my late father, from that care. And our aged care workers do an extraordinary job. And I know that many from this community work in that sector. And I say thank you for the great compassionate work that you do. But it is a challenging area as our country ages and the needs of those who are aging are becoming more acute. When we came to government, there were 60,000 in-home aged care places. More and more Australians are wanting to age at home and not go into residential aged care. We've increased that to 220,000. And we'll go to 270,000 under our response to the Aged Care Royal Commission. We've invested some $19.1 billion in our response to the Aged Care Royal Commission. But I won't pretend to you that it won't be a difficult road as we work tirelessly to fix the many problems and the challenges that we have in aged care. And one of the ones that you've raised are part of that. And that is in a multicultural society, as I mentioned in my remarks, it's important that we can have bespoke, tailored care and support for those in the community. That's very important. And in many different communities, we do just that. And we work closely with those communities on the development of those facilities and those training programs and so on. Now, one of the things that we've established is the Aged Care Advisory Council to help guide us in the implementation of our aged care reforms. And we'll be ensuring that there is a great diversity of input through that Aged Care Council. And I think you could expect to see representation from the Indian community, the Hindu community, in how we're guided and how we implement those reforms. Because I've been in the Parliament for some time. Alex and I came into the Parliament together almost 15 years ago. And one of the things that I've learnt over that time, it's one thing to say you're going to do something. And you hear a lot of that at elections, don't you? People say, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this. But the real test is, do you know how to do it? Can you implement it? Do you understand the challenges of implementing a policy? Can you fund it? Is it costed properly? Will you consult with the community in how you put it in place? Now, our government has a strong record on that, and particularly during the pandemic. And so the implementation of our aged care changes must be guided by those who are caring for community on the ground. And I would say that is in particular the case when it comes to the Hindu and Indian community here in Australia. The other thing that we need to get from the community is we need better data on the needs and how care can be managed within the Indian community. And we have the aajKal data strategy, which is funded under that program that I'm talking about, which is about helping those who are making decisions about resources that are being allocated and how training is done. Because one of our biggest challenges in the aged care sector is to get more people working in it. We have about 50,000 nurses who work in the aged care system, and we need a lot more. There's well more than that, twice more than that, 3 times who actually work in the sector as aged care providers, aged care workers, and we need more. And that means we need to train people from within this community who are able to go and work in those facilities. Because you know, when people go into a dementia care situation, oftentimes they will revert to their original language. And they may have spoken English for their entire time they've been here in Australia. But when dementia sets in, all they'll be able to remember is Hindi. And it's important that we have people who have those language skills. So we're aware of these cultural sensitivities and issues that need to be addressed in the implementation of our aged care strategy.
Thank you for that, Mr. Morrison. Our next question is, you saw this beautiful dance by these 2 girls here.
It's magnificent.
Yeah. We want to preserve that culture for next generation. We want to preserve our languages. We want to have a Hindu education and culture center. What can you do for us?
I might ask Alex to comment a bit more on this, but I must agree, Jenny and I greatly appreciate the cultural performance. I don't know how long they had to practice to learn that. that was incredible. And the detail of that, and it's just so important. It's so important that those skills, particularly for young people, are learned and passed on. It's important for those language skills to be learned and passed on. Of course, English is first language here in Australia, and that's never going to change. But that doesn't mean you give up your other languages. It's one of the great lessons we learn about Indigenous languages in this country. And we're working hard to try and resurrect and restore many Indigenous languages in this country because it's important for culture. It's important for ceremony. And that is true in the Hindu culture as well. And we do want to see that preserved. So I'm going to let Alex speak a lot more about that. I won't steal all of his thunder. He can speak to those issues.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I will steal your thunder just to say those beautiful girls you saw here are from my electorate of Mitchell. So I'm very proud of that. And my mother is a very famous artist, so that was a 7,000-year-old dance, which underscores what you're saying. And we're very proud of the Hindu culture that's been brought to Australia. To your question, it's a very important one, and the Morrison government has funded and supported communities in a lot of their endeavours in many different ways. So we look for the best quality proposals, especially about cultural centres. We have many proposals from different communities, obviously with 300 different cultures, 120 different faith groups that come regularly. So we welcome those proposals to fund cultural centres all around the country. At this election, we've announced some millions of dollars for some Hindu temples, cultural centres in various parts of Australia already. And I know you're working on that proposal for a Hindu cultural centre in Australia. It's something we welcome to see. But we do fund those centres of education in Australia, especially so we can do national repositories of culture where people can pass that on to generations down the track. And many of you know me. My mother was born in Greece. The Greeks who've taken over Melbourne over many, many years, many decades, have set up their own cultural centres and have got support from the Morrison government. You've seen we've put the first Dean of Hellenic Studies into the University of Melbourne. Now I can see, with India being our #1 source country for migrants for the last 2 decades, as the Prime Minister said, and many decades to come, we're going to have similar processes happen in Australia, supporting Hindu culture. So we welcome those applications.
There are 3 particular areas. We spend $40 million supporting these types of initiatives, and one is $9 million to support community language schools, some 400 across Australia. And then on top of that, one that Alex, you've just announced in the last few days, and that's the Fostering Integration Grants program, and that deals with cultural events and the upgrading of community facilities. Now, the point Alex makes is a very important one. It's sort of, the money doesn't come first and the proposal comes later. What's important is that we want these cultural centres and these activities to come from the ground up. We want the vision of the community for what they want to do. And we're partners in this. And we've developed many of these facilities all around the country. And we've announced some of them over the course of this election too. But what we want is for them to come out of the community, so it's servicing the needs of the community. And when that occurs, we have always found a way to ensure that we've been able to support those financially.
Thank you. That's a homework for you, Mr. Prakash Mehta. Get in the proposal as soon as possible.
Prime Minister's right, so the fostering integration grants only opened last week, so it's not off his game yet, it's only been open 1 week.
My next question reminds me of your visits to Diwali. Both of you have been coming every year, and you have been tasting our curries. And we have noticed you're using them for your foreign policy as well now. My question is, you've already talked so much about trade with India. Is there anything else you would like to add? Where do you see it going in 5 years, 15 years, 20 years time?
Well, I see it, as I set out, that it will encompass more and more of the trade that occurs between Australia and India. One of the most important areas where Narendra and I have been real partners on, and this happens through the Quad relationship. And the Quad relationship is myself, Narendra Modi, Fumio Kishida, the Prime Minister of Japan, and Joe Biden, the President of the United States. And there's a meeting coming up just over in the next fortnight. And one of the things that Narendra and I have been working on is to ensure that the critical minerals and rare earths that are in Australia can be produced in Australia and can be part of the supply chain that is linking in with industry in India. And solar panels that are made, mobile phones, all of these sorts of things, they go back to these rare earths and critical minerals and the processing of those. Now, most of those only come today out of China. And what we're keen to do is set up alternative supply chains. Narendra has a very wise saying that says, supply chains are no longer just about price, they are about trust. And so the trusted relationship between Australia and India means that development from our mines, and Ben Morgan's here from Western Australia, the great mining state of Australia where much of this will take place, that will be an important partnership with a lot of the high volume manufacturing activities in India. The other one, which is incredibly important, at the Glasgow summit, I followed Narendra. I was speaking straight after him, and he didn't observe the time limit and nobody said anything. I can assure you. He had a lot to say that day and he was going to say it. And I agreed with him very strongly. We're committed to net zero by 2050. And we will get there by developing the technology. We're investing $22 billion in the technology that will transform economies over the next 30 years, which will see that achieved. And that is possible. Development of hydrogen and clean hydrogen in particular, carbon capture, use and storage, all of these technologies critical to us meeting our global targets. But one of the things that Narendra often says is that, well, we're still developing our country. We're still trying to modernise our country in India. We're trying to develop our industries, develop our training, our manufacturing capabilities, our industrial strength. And developed countries have had the opportunity to do that over many, many decades without all of these restrictions on emissions. And so we see our role in this partnership of not achieving net zero by 2050 by putting sanctions and controls on countries, but by working together to ensure the technology they need to transform their economies is commercial, is affordable, and can be delivered at scale. Once you do that, if we can solve the climate change challenge for India, then we solve it for the world. It's not enough. It's not enough to solve it in Australia. We can reduce our emissions to zero. And the United States have said the same thing. The United States could reduce their emissions to zero. But if in the many other countries of the world their emissions continue to rise, we'll make no progress. Now, I know Narendra does want to make progress. And I know he's very keen on it. That's why one of the key issues in our partnership is our clean energy partnership. And so when we crack the hydrogen challenge, and we can produce hydrogen at $2 a kilo, and we can then deploy that technology at scale in countries like India, but also Indonesia, in Vietnam, in Malaysia, then Australia will be in a position to enjoy great success because we're solving the problem, not assigning the blame. And this is how you solve problems.
Thank you very much. The next question is about, I think, more for Mr. Hawke, but he will need your support, Mr. Morrison. Do you support a less expensive and easy process for parents' visa? Anecdotal evidence suggests that having grandparents at home empowers new mothers as they can continue to work. It saves government on childcare subsidies and increases workplace productivity.
Yeah, thank you, Surinder, for the question. This is one of the most important issues to migrant communities over time in the visa system. And you're right, a good minister needs the support of their Prime Minister always on every issue.
He does pretty well.
And I have to say, the Prime Minister, when I was a junior minister in immigration a number of years ago, asked me to, when he was Treasurer, develop the sponsored temporary parent visa, which was a new visa. Australia's been trying to solve this problem for access to parents and grandparents for many years. All countries wrestle with their migrant populations how to have access to parents and grandparents from all backgrounds, from all countries. And Australia, I believe, has been at the forefront of doing more on this so we can have more access. So since we developed the sponsored temporary parent visa, we had about 5,000 parents who have been able to access Australia for 5 years and 10 years that otherwise would never have had that opportunity. So that's thanks to this Prime Minister and the development of that new visa. So that's been a step forward. In relation to the other programs, I've said to the community very clearly, a re-elected Morrison government, we will continue to work with communities about how do we improve the system for access to parents. The pandemic has changed some things. Processing times have become longer because of the pandemic and the borders being shut. But you might remember it was Scott Morrison that said as soon as the borders opened that every Australian needed immediately as a priority access to parents and grandparents in the visitation system. And that was very important. And the reason I know he said that is because he understands families came first in that hierarchy. The thing that people missed the most in the last 2 years was their parents and grandparents, and obviously a lot of people lost a lot of relatives as well, and we know from India too. So we're committed to that. We will have a roundtable about it. I'm looking at things like that the community's raised the balance of family test and how that operates. It can be unfair to people that have a son in UK, a daughter in Canada, and one here in Australia. That can impact unfairly in our immigration system on access to parents. So there's a lot to do, but we've taken a lot of steps forward. And we know the challenges. I won't speak about them all today because we speak about this regularly. And so does the Hindu-Council, and so do many migrant communities. But remember, we have 7.6 million people in Australia born overseas who've come here. And we have to do our best to give them access to parents and grandparents, especially in the later phases of life, but also deal with the cost on our health system. And we think we're getting the balance as best as possible. There's a bit more work to do, especially about access. But now people can have 5 and 10 year access. Visitor visas are only $145 for 12 months. It's very competitive in the rest of the world. What's a priority for me, as soon as I can get back to work on this, is to make sure those visitor visas are processed a lot faster for parents and grandparents to come and go.
So the next question is for Prime Minister Liu. Of course, you can add in Mr. Hawke if you want to. You have already declared that you will bring a law that protects faiths and its followers from being discriminated. The concern our community has is, will it have any adverse effect on workplace discrimination employment of, and services to Hindus provided by other faith-based institutes?
No, is the short answer to that question. We have in this country a series of laws that protect Australians because of what they call attributes. Your gender, your ethnicity, your race. But one such set of laws that does not exist is protections on the basis of your faith, of your religion. And I know from being an immigration minister and having been very active in this area, and Alex would know as well, that the issue of faith and culture and ethnicity sometimes is indistinguishable. In fact, one reinforces the other. I was reminded of this recently when Russia invaded Ukraine. Where did Jeannie and I go to be with that community? We went to Licton to be there with the Catholic Church community of the Ukrainian Australians who were here. And there they were taking solace and comfort and strength from their faith. Government shouldn't tell people what their faith should be. That's one of the great freedoms of this country. But they shouldn't also tell faith how it should be practiced in this country. They should be able to preserve the tenets of their faith and to uphold them within their faith. We're a secular country and we must obey the broader laws of our country. Of course we do. That is the foundation of a rule of law country. As true in India as it is in Australia. But I do believe it is important that we protect from discrimination against people of faith, or whatever that faith is. And you know what? Also, those who don't have any faith. They should also be protected from discrimination if they don't have such a faith. It's sometimes a difficult issue to talk about, I find. I've been talking about it for 15 years in the Parliament. Alex will remember I raised it in the very first speech, my maiden speech in Parliament. I was very concerned that the voice of faith in this country was going to be removed from the public square, I said. And then I reflected on how important the role of faith communities plays in an open democratic society. We reflect the Karma Kitchen, a classic example. And so many other great works that are done by faith communities all around the country, and so many different faiths. Motivated, because faith ultimately is motivated by love, it's motivated by a care for others and a sense of personal responsibility for the world in which we live. That's what drives it. It brings families together, it brings communities together. I see this as a great strength of our country, not a weakness, not something that undermines it, not something that discriminates or divides. I see it as one of the underlying strengths of our country. And that's why I want discrimination against faith to be protected.
Thank you very much for that. I have so many more questions, but we are running out of time. Can I ask one more question? If you are elected, how will you support Hindu community in Parramatta? Parramatta is hard country for us.
Yeah, well, I think the best person to answer that is Maria Kavasi. So I asked Maria, my candidate, the Liberal candidate here in Parramatta, to come up and answer that question.
Thank you for the question, and it's a very important question. And one of the comments that the Prime Minister made earlier in his speech was around the $250,000 that a re-elected Morrison government will provide to this community for the Karma Kitchen. And that's the example of the type of a relationship we have. But in terms of me and what I have to offer, I'll take on some words that came from Prime Minister Modi that the Prime Minister shared, which is that the world is a family. I believe that Western Sydney and Parramatta is a family. And we together in this room are a family because we have a shared experience, we have a shared pathway. I'm one of those 7.2 million people, I think, whose parents are born overseas or who are born, my parents are part of that group. I understand what it's like to have a different multicultural background. I understand what it's like to go to school without English. I understand what it's like to be from a community that is different to the one that you're in, where you want to retain and hold on to your culture, but you absolutely love and hold on to your new home. So they're very, very important experiences. So that's the journey that I've had in my life that I bring to this community. And I'll finish it off with one thing. The Prime Minister, I'm borrowing 3 things from you, I'm very sorry, but I like them all. Is when you're asking somebody, particularly in political leadership, when they're promising you something, you ask, have they done it before or can they do it? Well, I've done it before and I've been doing it for the past 10 years. For the past 10 years, I've been advocating for this community, not as a politician or a parliamentarian or an aspiring politician, but as a part of this community. For multicultural Australia, for young women, for vulnerable communities and for small business. So, and I'll just share one more thing. It's together we can achieve, and that's what we can all do together. So thank you.
You can see why I call her the real deal here at Parramatta.
Just before we finish, I'll point out you both mentioned world is one family. We have brought that concept to Australia. The scarf you're wearing is one version. There's another version which says Vasudev Kutumbakam, which means the whole world is one family. So you can call it an Australian virtue now. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Let's give a big hand.
One-stop answer to your Australian education and visa matters. GEMCO Sydney. Dream big, achieve big.
Fiji Times. Be with the times.